Don't have any deputations. We have 2 questions from the gallery. Peter Charles, there, you can come.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Thank you for accepting my questions, and hello to the new members. And to Oreo here, this faithful dog. Good to see him. In 2019, I put a motion to this council to purchase one of 3 vacant blocks on the eastern side of Coromandel Drive, McCracken. The objective of my motion then was to make available a point of entry or exit for those who wished or needed to cycle or walk to services on the Adelaide Road. In 2019, the only option, and to this day, is to use the one-way in and the one-way out, committing all residents to always use their motor vehicles. Walking and riding is not an option due to the very steep topography and distance needed to be covered. Children attending the Lutheran College would benefit from those, and those who want to shop at Coles, Aldi, etc. The path would receive daily use. At the ordinary council meeting on March 2019, item 22.1, council discussed in confidence a report which was provided for consideration. The block of land, number 181 Coromandel Drive, was later purchased so that there could be a walk bikeway in the future. A recent page 4 article in the Fleurieu Sun newspaper, 16th of February 2023, covered a particular resident's fear of native scrub and grasses are an ever-present fire threat, risking people's lives and homes along the river. This ever-present probable catastrophe for the residents in the city of Victor Harbor is made worse as it's a landlocked development along the McCracken Golf Course. Council, by providing 2-way access at number 181 with park-like landscaping, is not a luxury, it's an absolute health and welfare necessity. One question, will the councillors please seek administration's costings and place this urgently needed option in the 2023-24 budget? And 2, will the council also consider making the bike walkway at number 181 Coromandel Drive wider and more robust so that emergency services have an alternative point of entry? Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. I'll ask our CEO to answer that for you, if you could do that, Victoria.
Thank you. So firstly, I'd just like to note that these are requests of council, not particularly questions, as council is unable to respond without actually formalising a resolution, but I will provide you with some further information. So it is correct that council purchased 181 Coromandel Drive with a view to improving pedestrian bicycle access and circulation in the neighbourhood. This project has not yet received funding priority from council. 181 Coromandel Drive wouldn't likely service vehicular thoroughfare due to the height variations between the land and Adelaide Road and the position that DIPTI, Department of Environment, Infrastructure and Transport, holds on minimising access points to Adelaide Road. Council also owns 131 Coromandel Drive, which was a strategic purchase made in 2012 for the purposes of creating a road network connection into the Hindmarsh Valley residential zone to the north. There have been negotiations with the previous landowner developer of the Hindmarsh Valley zone to achieve this, and the negotiations will continue with the new landowner developer when the opportunity arises. There is a further possibility for the connection of road network from McCracken into Hindmarsh Valley Residential Road via Riverway Court, either via Hindmarsh Riverfront Reserve area or via further strategic land acquisition opportunities.
I should say thank you, but I have more questions, but I won't continue with that. It just is that it will not take people out to where they need to go. I know those other ones go through the new future development, which has just been sold, which was going to be Hickenbotham. They've got rid of it. Anyway, some other time. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. We have a question from Mr. Andrew Robertson. Mr. Robertson, if you'd like to take a seat.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two questions here, both related to biodiversity on Granite Island and minimising the human threats to our still surviving penguin colony. On this first question, which is on signage, the City of Victor Harbor has done a great service to the Granite Island penguin colony by unanimously supporting the permanent fixing of a "No Dogs on Granite Island" sign at the beginning of the causeway. The numbers of dogs on the causeway have been significantly reduced by this sign. My question is, when is the permanent sign going to be installed?
So what I understand, Mr. Robertson, is that Council's in the process of determining a suitable location to permanently install the sign, particularly given the low grade quality of the sign in the context of the two new due information/restriction signs and the Nurundi sculpture installation. So a request has been sent to Due and DIT seeking their permission for the possibility to fix the signage to their infrastructure.
The second question relates to white lights, bicycles and the tram stop on Granite Island. Bicycles are banned from Granite Island because of their habitat destruction, danger to wildlife and safety risk to pedestrians. Bicycles are now commonly seen in both daytime and at night, ridden by youth and a surprising number of seniors. At night time, when penguins return to their burrows, the bicycles are ridden at speed with a white headlamp that damages penguins' eyes and with accompanying flashing bulbs that disturb the penguins. The "No Bicycle" sign at the entrance to the causeway is a small decal about the size of the palm of your hand. There needs to be another much larger sign erected before the causeway saying "No bicycles on Granite Island." It's against the law. Also, the horse-drawn tram stop has just installed a strong white light with a motion detector, which also disturbs the birds. This light needs to have a red filter put on it to ensure that disturbance doesn't take place. My question is, can the City of Victor Harbor install a sign at the entrance to the causeway stating that bicycles and scooters are banned from being on Granite Island?
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. It's been difficult to determine a suitable location to fix the sign, as mentioned above. There's already signage there, and at that state, "No bicycles," and to add more signage creates a risk of signage clutter. However, what we're going to be doing is including this in our discussions with DIT and Due so that they can give us some assistance with this.
Well, if I might ask a supplementary question, Mayor, in that case, perhaps wouldn't it be better to be putting a proper sign up there rather than to be going to the problem of trying to deal with the bicycles on Granite Island issue through human intervention, like through inspectors?
As I said, Mr. Robertson, there is already signage there that state "No bicycles," and to add to more signage that creates a risk of signage clutter. We will be including this in our discussion with Due and DIT so that we can get a permanent sign there. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no further questions from the gallery and no petitions, so we move on to item 9, which is outstanding resolutions for February 2023 and the recommendations that Council will receive the report. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schiller. And do I have a seconder for that, Councillor Henderson? Do either of you have any questions or anything that you'd like to discuss? Does anybody have any questions in relation to the report? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one question. On page 12 of the outstanding resolutions, it's talking about the Fleurieu Waste Authority providing costing to the council on hard rubbish on the 4th of April.
and I was just wondering if we could request that they actually do it earlier, unfortunately, and I just thought that's 7 months since I requested, so 6 months would still be reasonable if they could, so we can at least have the discussion in March if possible.
We can certainly ask them if
Yeah,
that
I mean,
fits
they
in
may
with their timeline.
Sure.
And that shouldn't be a problem. The other thing that you may be interested in is that we were at the Southern and Hills Local Government Association meeting on Kangaroo Island the last 2 days, and I spoke to one of the directors who was representing Mount Barker, and they have just initiated a hard rubbish collection there, and we asked them to send through the model that they use, and that's been sent through today. So I haven't had a chance to look at that, but I will distribute that so that elected members are able to consider that in line with the feedback from Frawa as well, because I know that myself personally and a number of elected members are really keen to look at a model of hard rubbish collection that doesn't impact extreme costs on the community, because of course all of these services costs money, and so we need to have one that is sustainable and affordable.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or discussion? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. On the hard copy agenda item, I've got item 10. It talks about the Flinders Parade Esplanade pedestrian crossing investigation. It's got completed, and I'm just wondering why it's completed, considering that we still have endorsed progressing a concept design and cost estimates to be undertaken under this resolution. So I don't see why it's completed. If I could have an explanation. I think it should still be on the outstanding resolution.
Perhaps Kathy, would that be you? What page are you looking at, Councillor Kemp?
That's
10?
page 10. It's the first page of the completed resolutions, third item down.
Through the Mayor, thank you, Councillor Kemp. So this one, Councillor Kemp, is included in the discussion for the 23-24 budget, so it will be included as part of that discussion.
The question is, why is it on the completed outstanding resolution when it's not completed? It's still outstanding because it hasn't been completed yet.
Sorry, through the Mayor.
Yep.
The actual investigation report has been, I believe, considered by Council, which is what that resolution refers to.
Look, I appreciate that, but again, it's just in the recommendation, the information that sort of contradicts what the resolution is about. So it's sort of giving, to me, misguided information as to whether it's completed or not completed. So I think there may be an opportunity to improve the writings of the resolution recommendations. The second one, which is opposite to this one, is on page 12, which is at the bottom of the page, to do with the motions without notice volunteer video by Councillor Marilyn Henderson. This one is involved in to be undertaken during the development of the 23-24 budget and present to as a budget bid. That's been completed, has been presented as a budget bid. So to me, that resolution is now completed. That's on the outstanding resolutions. So it's confusing when you read these documents as to what the outcome is of these resolutions. And the third item is for members, elected members for research and to go back in. I was on the impression that the completed resolutions, we had a 12-month supply of information there. This has certainly been reduced right down to virtually 1 page now. And for elected members to go back and research past resolutions, we'll be able to do that without taking up staff time by sending through requests to look at past resolutions. So is it possible through the CEO that we could have at least 12 months, because I thought they rocked off after 12 months, they've been on there, they get taken off and new ones are added all the time. So is that the case, or can it be actually put that place so we can actually research back through past resolutions? Because we do get a lot of requests from members of the public about various things, and sometimes going back to the resolution and checking out what committee it was on or what meeting we could provide that information. Is that a possibility?
So through the Mayor, I'm happy to look at that and take it on notice. I can't see any reason why we can't have the outstanding resolutions from previous meetings in a file for members to go back, because obviously we list all the outstanding resolutions. But in regards to your question from item 10, so while that resolution actually referred to an item that went to council in the 22nd of August, and yes, it says it's completed because there's a report that went to January, the 23rd of January, and if you look on page 14, that resolution, the Armstrong Road, indicates what went to January, and it is still outstanding in regards to the traffic management study is being done. So it's closing out one resolution, and there's been another one because a further report has been to council, so it is still sitting on here. But the resolution from August is complete because a further report was presented to council.
Thank you for that, CEO. Just again, back on that item, the concept designs and cost estimates are still being done, so that's
Correct,
closed
and that's what it states on page. Request to increase budget is being processed by finance. Consultants have been engaged to prepare the traffic impact statement.
Yep, thank you very much. It's just a clarification because the way it reads sometimes is a little bit confusing.
I certainly appreciate, Councillor Kemp, what you're saying, because it does actually I find it challenging because some resolutions don't have an end. So they could actually sit on here forever because they're ongoing decisions or things that we do as a chamber. So I think for another day, we should have a discussion around at what stages and the wording of our resolution so that when we can close them out and the members feel comfortable that an action has been made. And I'll also follow up in regards to the ongoing resolutions being on the members' laptops so you can research them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or any further discussion in relation to the outstanding resolutions? All those in favour of the recommendation? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The 9.2, which is the Fleurieu Regional Community Services Advisory Committee, terms of reference. The recommendation is that council adopt the reviewed terms of reference. I think the main things are to add electronic, the ability for electronic meetings in that so that we don't lose quorum, and the Fleurieu Regional Community Services Advisory Committee changing its name to the Wellbeing Committee. Those are the two main things that I could see. Would someone like to move the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and seconded Councillor Schofield. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Schofield?
I'll just say that reading through it, it's just very, very simple changes and they're good ones.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or any comments? Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. One of the things I find interesting about this document, and it is simple as Councillor Schofield said, is a reasonably good document, but because it's stated as a Fleurieu Region Community Service, not a City of Victor Harbor Advisory Committee, I'm just wondering with the MOU with the Yankalilla Council that there's a few questions. Has the Yankalilla Council seen these terms of reference and they agree with the terms of reference? Because if they go to have an MOU with them in partnership for this to happen, should they actually have seen this? Also, should the memorandum of understanding between the partner councils come to this chamber at the same time the terms of reference are being changed so we can have a better understanding on how that will operate? The other questions is basically with the ex officio from the mayor of our council, should the mayor of the Yankalilla Council be an ex officio as well, because it's a partnership arrangement between two councils under a Section 41 committee. The other one is through the terms of reference, because we're having two councils involved in this committee with representation from each council and community members, should we rotate the chair every 12 months and not just one chair for 4 years, share the workload between two councils? So these are some of the things that I think could be re-looked at in the terms of reference.
I'll ask the CEO to answer those. Thank you, David Kemp.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Unlike it's not a subsidiary, so if it was a subsidiary as a Section 42, which it's not, I would concur with your questions, but we as the Auspice Council, we hold the funding, and we have the MOUs are almost like a contract arrangement where we contract those services to those other councils. So the terms of reference are that of this council. It is the City of Victor Harbor that auspices and manages those services, and we pretty much contract them out. And by way of the regional agreement, we do have representation from Yankalilla Council on the committee, as we did with Alexandrina Council when they had an MOU for similar arrangements. So the MOU is a completely separate document, and that's for the delivery of those services within those council areas. So it doesn't require us to provide the terms of reference for consultation to those councils, and they're not significantly changed, and they don't alter the current MOUs.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion or questions, Councillor Karimba?
Mine is not as in-depth as Councillor Kemp, but just why the change from services to wellbeing?
Right.
Through the Mayor, that's for consistency with the community services service review that was completed perhaps 2 or 3 years ago now, which also recommended the change of that service area of council to be known as community wellbeing rather than community services. So it's just to be consistent.
Just a follow-up question. So there's still going to be, like, is there outcomes that come from this committee that are documented?
Absolutely. You get the minutes of those that committee.
Yep.
And you can ask them any questions.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any further, Councillor Mann?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, just quickly, there was a mention around the previous MOU with Alexandrina Council, and previously they were an active partner in the community space with the City of Victor Harbor. I'm just wondering whether there's been any approach now that they've got a new base of elected members to see whether they're happy to join and support in terms of the community services, and whether there's anything that council should be asking them.
Through the Mayor, there's been nothing formally forthcoming from Alexandrina at this point in time, although we understand that there may be an interest to re-engage in a similar sort of agreement to what was held previously.
Are there any further questions or any further debate? Put that recommendation to the floor, unless Councillor Henderson, you want to close anything up? All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Item 9.3, which is the annual business plan mid-year review. And you recall that this went to the audit committee and was we had quite a long briefing on this particular item as well. So the recommendation is that we receive and note the business plan mid-year review report. Would anyone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Burns. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Again, it's about the wordage and doing things like the status of these reports. Use the word on track. Sometimes it fits, sometimes it doesn't fit to what the instructions are inside there. So I would ask the administration if they could look at another word like progressing. Might be a better word than on track, or come most a little bit more clearer. On the second page of page 31, it's got a statement of status on track, but it's got here, it's anticipated that design, cost essays, supporting documentation will be workshopped with council members in February 23, followed by a report seeking their endorsement, formal response to the heritage essays of the Arts and Culture Centre design stage 1. Now, it says on track, so if that's on track, then we only got one day to have a workshop. If it was progressing, then you could say, well, we can't do the workshop because we ran out of time or something. So again, it's about getting the right wordage out. And I've got one more, but we can answer that one first.
Yeah, no, if I may, Mayor, through the Mayor, I appreciate what you're saying, that these reports actually were prepared in December and presented to the audit committee meeting following, so the December quarterly updates. So yes, I think when they're updated now, they're not quite on track, but this is as at December. It was a December quarter report. So unfortunately, unless I change a report that was presented to the audit committee, it's not the purpose of it. I don't want to alter it. So yes, we are one day out of February and that item would need to be updated.
I appreciate that, thank you. But again, 2 months is a long time for a report to get to chamber to give an update on where we're sitting, because things have changed in that period. So I'm just wondering about that.
I appreciate that. And again, these are more formal reports, again, in terms of our annual business plan and budget, providing more so our community with an update of those projects that were placed within the annual business plan and budget. Elected members get regular updates, weekly updates on most of these projects. For example, the Bluff boat ramp toilets are completed, but in this report, as of December, they weren't because they were only completed in the last week. So I do recognise what you're saying, but it's the purpose of what these reports are for. They're not a weekly update for elected members. It's a quarterly report of the annual business plan and budget.
I do note in the commentary, Councillor Kemp, that this was presented to the Audit Committee in February and moved by Councillor Burns and seconded by yourself, accepting it as a mid-year report. So the report's now coming from that meeting to Council.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I appreciate that comment. Yes, but sometimes you review, reflect, and you find things that maybe you missed first time. So it's an opportunity to speak to it. The second one I want to talk to is local government elections, which is on page 34. It's got completed. Yes, the elections have completed, but you have a statement in there which says training and briefings will continue to occur and be scheduled for council members in line with requirements. So would that require a new KPA to complete that or not? Just a question.
The mandatory training that has needed to be done at that time is completed. There will be ongoing training and that will be completed when it is done, but we have completed the training that has needed to be done by now.
Thank you. Yep, no problems. Thank you very much for that.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. When I was reading this also, was looking for updates, but I also understood it was December. So I totally understand what you're saying and I'm looking forward to the next updates.
Thank you. Councillor Karemba.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. So when this review was done and submitted by Councillor Burns and Kemp, or moved and second, what was the budget implication on operating deficit at that time? Was it the $1 million or was it what it is now, or when this review was done?
So through the Mayor, Councillor Coimbra, it's a December quarter review. So you've got the December budget review is in this council agenda. You're receiving it at the same time.
Yep. Okay. And so now it's 1.7 something, whatever you spoke about last budget meeting. Is that right?
It's exactly what's within the papers that's presented to you.
Great. Thank you.
Are there any further discussion or questions that anybody has? Councillor Kemp, did you want to close the debate? Do you have anything to add?
Just a question again around clarity of what's written. I guess is that somehow make it a bit more clearer or a little bit more commentary to explain some of the statements. Might be a little bit more easier for elected members, but again, I'm not quite sure how you do that. But just something to consider, because you can read, and if the community reads the agenda, it can be confusing for them too.
I'm happy to take on any feedback if you'd like to have more detail within the report that informs the community more effectively. I'm happy to workshop that with members.
Thank you. I'll now put this to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move to 9.4, which is the tree assessment policy and panel. The first recommendation is that Council endorse the reviewed tree management policy as provided in attachment A, which I'm sure you all have read. Does somebody want to move that first recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and seconding Councillor Schiller. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Henderson? No. Councillor Schiller? No. Does anybody else want to speak to that? In that case, all those in favour? Those against? That's carried. So now we need to appoint somebody to the position of council member representative to the tree assessment panel. If we have more than one nomination, then I'll allow up to 3 minutes for those who nominate to say why they should be on the tree assessment panel. And then I will move a recommendation to appoint the CEO as a returning officer for the purposes of a ballot. Who would like to nominate to be on the tree assessment policy and panel? Nobody? Nobody's interested in being on the tree assessment panel?
Mayor, if no one wants to nominate, I'm happy to put myself forward. I was actually more interested in equally interested, not more, in the Murray Darling Association, the next discussion, but happy to help out.
That would be lovely. Is there anybody else that's interested in the tree assessment panel? No. In that case, then I'd like to recommend rather that council appoints Councillor Burns to the position of council member representative. Moved that way, Councillor Schofield, and seconded that way, Councillor Mann. Is there any discussion? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Councillor Burns. I think it's a really important panel to be on because I think we need to really look at what trees need to stand and those that need to go. So having a council member on there's, I think, a really good opportunity. Thank you. We now move to item 9.5, which is the Murray-Darling Association council member. So we've only had one councillor before, but we can have two councillors on that panel, on that association rather. If we have more than two councillors putting their hand up for this, then I will appoint the Chief Executive Officer to be the returning officer and we'll go to a ballot. Councillor Burns, you've indicated that you would like to be on that. Is there anybody else that would like to be on the Murray-Darling Association panel? Councillor Corimba? Anybody else that would like to be on that Murray-Darling Association panel? No. If not, we can move to recommendation 2. So speak up or forever hold your peace, as they say. And the recommendation will be that council appoints Councillor Burns and Councillor 6 until the conclusion of the 2026 periodic election. Do I have someone to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schiller. And Councillor Henderson seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Burns?
Just wanting to comment, I think the association does well. I think very important to the river's health, and whilst a number of members have been on there, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's a great opportunity given that we have one of the activities coming through here. So quite excited about it.
Thank you. All those in favour? And those against? Councillor Corimba, do you vote? No. In favour? Thank you. Congratulations to Councillor Burns and Councillor Corimba. I think, as Councillor Burns said, it is a great opportunity to represent our region in the Murray-Darling Association. So that's great. Item 9.6 is the 2022 local government periodic elections disclosure return. And the recommendation is to receive and note the notification in relation to the area of office councillor formerly occupied by Michael Quinton becoming vacant. But just for letting you know, there has been some legislation passed through the lower house and is about to go to the upper house this week. When it is gazetted, it will be as though those councillors that have been lost office will be reinstated and will have 10 days to put in their ordinary return. I think the government has realised that this is a systemic issue. It's happened to so many people. A number of people who have lost office had genuinely tried to put in their returns. And so this is a way of fixing it. There will be a review into the whole election the way the elections were carried out, process, thank you, into the election process, and hopefully this won't happen again. So we're hopeful that Councillor Quinton, who was very upset that this happened and was very keen to get back into council, will happen very soon. But the recommendation is to receive and note the notification that he has the office area formerly occupied by him has become vacant. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. And seconded by, thank you, Councillor Karimba. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Schofield, then Councillor Karimba.
Oops. Thank you. Look, I'll just say that I also had a great deal of trouble putting my return in, and it was extremely frustrating. So I do feel for these 46 people, and if it's something that hasn't happened before, then it's not the fault of the people trying to put their forms in. It is the system that has failed.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Councillor Karimba.
I'd just like to, I noted that you said it's gone through the lower house and it still has to go through the upper house. I think it's going to be this week. They're debating it. If it doesn't go through, what is our position then regarding that position?
Then I presume it will revert back that the councillors who have had to vacate their seats will put in it'll go to SACAC. So they'll put in a not complaint to SACAC, that's the wrong word, but an appeal to SACAC. So they'll appeal to SACAC, and that will be assessed on an individual basis.
And if Councillor Quinton is successful, what is our way forward then? What's meeting protocol, I guess, or what's our protocol for such a situation?
Look, if he's successful through SACAT, he comes back. If he's not successful through SACAT, then we'll need to get advice on terms of what's the next process. However, I don't want to go into what ifs and what happens. We're waiting for this legislation to go through. We're fairly confident that it will go through. It's being supported by both the major parties and the independents, and so we look forward to welcoming Councillor Quinton back with us as soon as he is able. Are there any further discussion? Councillor Schiller? Sorry.
Just that I think it needs to get back to the Electoral Commission that there needs to be multiple ways to submit that form, whether it be through the portal, emailed back or posted back, not just have one option, because that allows people to get it in there in their own way. And the factor that the CEO was not notified prior to them being expelled, that should be changed so that there's the opportunity to internally advise the people within our council.
Thank you for that. And yes, there will be, I think, a inquiry into that whole process, so that what happened last year, doesn't repeat itself. It was a new process. Previously, the CEOs were involved with informing members that their returns needed to be in and they were running late. That didn't happen this time. It was the responsibility of the Electoral Commission. The other thing this year was that there were 2 returns. Previously, there had only been 1 return. And so the Electoral Commission hadn't dealt with any of this before. So there certainly will be, and there has been a lot of feedback given back to them through the Local Government Association, and we're hopeful that this won't happen again. If there's no further discussion, Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I just find it interesting, the process. Maybe I'm as a special person or something, that I submitted my forms. I made a mistake on them. They sent it back, did it with the correct information, sent it back. No, thank you, and it's been amended and been accepted. So I don't understand how hard it was to do it, and the notifications were right there all the time. So sympathy to some, maybe they had some problems, but I think it's been blown out of all proportion to a degree, because a lot of people, when you look at how many councillors and mayors were voted in those elections, around 68 councillors, I think a very small number were affected. So, yeah, I'll leave it up to your own decisions about how that happened.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. And I think, yes, there were some 40-odd councillors that it was affected. It wasn't just 1 or 2 who were being tardy, but given the large numbers and given the problems that we have found out, or the Local Government Association have found out that people had in submitting their forms, who had thought that they had submitted their forms, and some of those issues, there was much more of a systemic issue. But I do take your point that there may have been 1 or 2 tardy councillors in that group. Unfortunately, so that sometimes is the case. Is there any further discussion on this item? I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. I have a material conflict of interest in the following items. So the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Kemp, to come and take my place, please. The reason that I have a material interest is that the item involves endorsing me to go to the 2023 National General Assembly in Canberra.
We have moved on to 9.7 on the agenda item, 2023 National General Assembly. The recommendation before us is that Council appoints Mayor Maura Jenkins as the City of Victor Harbor voting delegate to be registered to attend the National General Assembly of Local Government to be held at the National Convention Centre in Canberra on the 13th to 16th of June 2023, and endorse the transfer of $1,040 from job number 70972, the Mayoral Training and Conference, to job number 70973, the mayoral travel accommodation expenses in the 22-23 operating budget. Do I have a mover? Councillor Schofield, do you want to speak to the motion?
Yes, look, I will. This is a very important, it's really not an event, a meeting to attend. And, you know, while some people might think, wow, $1,000, well, the expertise and the Mayor's participation in a national conference like this in Canberra will bring more back to our community, and I think it's good to actually support it.
Thank you. I'll call for a seconder. Councillor Henderson, would you like to speak to, would anybody like to speak to it? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Normally I would have no issue with this, and it's not a question about the money. My understanding is the CEO is already going to this meeting, and please correct me if that's incorrect, and the Mayor would be an additional person. With any of these state or national meetings. I just think at a time of community financial stress, the council should be looking at local issues, not state or national. And I understand the benefit of this. However, I think that we need to be saying to the community, the council are looking at cutting back on travel or anything that isn't mandatory, it's optional. And whilst it's a very small amount and the amount is probably won't impact anything, I think it's just sending the right message to our community. And accordingly, normally for an economic time, I wouldn't even hesitate to do it.
Thank you, Councillor Burns. I'll ask the CEO on the position of the role of a CEO in this attendance, and also the CEO could actually answer the question around that that council members or the mayor accompany the executive officer to the ALGA, so council members could attend as well.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. So in response to your question, I would be attending if the Mayor attends. I have attended in the past, but not through funded by the council. It's been through other board roles that I've sat on from Local Government Professionals Australia, so represented that body. It's normal, it's a custom if the Mayor does go, they're accompanied by the CEO. It just enables me to, one, provide introductions to various parties and bureaucrats within Canberra, and have meetings with the Minister in which I can speak directly on matters of interest for the City of Victor Harbor. I do not need to attend, so if that's a detriment decision of the Chamber that the Mayor doesn't go, I don't need to go. It is open to all elected members, so it's not just a function that the Mayor or the CEO attend. I have participated where there is a delegation from some councils that attend. And that may depend on if that council has particular matters that they're putting up through ALGA and seeking decision. But it's open to all elected members to participate and attend. And we do have provision for professional development and training for our council members to participate.
I'll just have another, before I ask for any person to speak, I do have another question for the CEO. Since this recommendation is before us now to make a decision on whether a mayor attends, how do we go about if any elected member would like to attend as well as part of this resolution?
Given it's the main item was around the General Assembly and it was put because the Mayor requested interest in attending, we did send out the notice to all elected members. But tonight, if other members are interested in attending and you'd like to do a subsequent motion where other members are supported by the Chamber, then they can be supported and we would find the budget allocation to do so.
Thank you. I'll call upon any other member who would like to speak or against the motion on what's on the floor at the moment. Councillor Coimbra.
Yeah, we spoke about $1,000, I think was the 1,040, but the actual cost, is that, am I reading this right? Estimated cost at 2,350, which made up of $1,200 for the conference fees, 500 for flights and 750 for accommodation. And then also want to note that it actually says here the council representative at the NGA is not compulsory. I understand that there is benefit, but agreeing with Councillor Burns that, you know, when things are tight, what sort of a message does it send out to the community spending this money, even though it may not seem like a lot to us, to people in the community, it is a lot. And if we are going to send someone, I'd like to put a motion forward that it is a representative, and I'm quite happily personally fund it.
Okay, we'll discuss that at the moment.
Sure.
Anybody else want to speak to the current motion on Councillor Schiller?
I think that for a strategic position to have both the CEO and Mayor attend this particular conference would be appropriate, and I think that we should be voting for this in terms of bringing networking at that level. It's necessary. Thank you.
Anybody else like to speak to this motion? If no one else wants to speak, I'll call for who's for the motion. Sorry.
I'd like to close the debate, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I apologise, Councillor Schofield.
I don't know how many of the elected members or even the members of the public have attended anything in Canberra. The opportunities to attend Canberra to mix with the ministers, head of state and federal governments is very, very important. It's important for our community because it opens the doors when we're looking for grants and support for our community. You've already got what you call a foot in the door. If we're having a look and we're talking about the $1,000, it's already in the budget. Because if you're looking, it's there under mayoral training and it's just being shifted out of one column into another. Look, I just can't express the importance of attending something like this, and I've had the privilege to attend quite a few, and you'd be really, really surprised what it would do for Victor Harbor when the need comes. And I know a lot of people in the gallery don't agree with me, but that's quite all right. I've actually walked the floors and I know what it's worth.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. I'll now call for a vote. Or who's all in favour? Raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against? 1, 2. The motion.
Can I call a division, please?
Yes. People in favour, could you please stand? Councillor Schiller, you don't need to stand. That's fine. Councillor Mann. Councillor Schiller. Councillor Schofield. And Councillor Henderson. Is any member who... I'll just call for any other further recommendations if any member would like to. Sorry. Councillor Burns and Councillor Coimbra who are against. That's all right. We're learning. So, yes, is any other member of the chamber who would like to attend this as part of a training session and networking on behalf of the council and like to move a motion to that effect? Okay, I'll call the this agenda item closed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Kemp. So we now move on to the 99.8, the 2022-23 December budget review. Again, this has gone to the Audit Committee and we have had a workshop on this previously. The recommendation is that Council endorse the budget review, providing a net capital expenditure of $11,940,700 and an operating deficit of $1,750,000. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And seconded by? Thank you, Councillor Mann. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Mann, no. Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp and then Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I do have a few questions on the statement of the comprehensive income. On the first page of that, it talks about operating income, the rates of $26,159,000 as adopted budget, September review and the December review, they haven't moved, so we haven't received any rates for the last 6 months. Is that correct? Because that's the way the figures read.
No, it's just stating that that was the amount of rates that we raised, that we would raise. It doesn't state that we haven't received them all in. They're received at various stages throughout the year. Just through the Mayor, if I may, Mark Threadgold, who is our Team Leader Finance, is here to also assist with any questions that members may have, and I'll ask him just to come forward to the chair. He may or may not be able to answer any, but I just know he was here because Kelly Knight Stacey is away at the moment. So thank you, Mark, and for those members who haven't met Mark before, Mark is our Team Leader Finance.
Just to clarify my question then to Mark, because this is a comprehensive review of basically for the last 6 months, but surely there must be movement in figures. There's other movements in figures in other columns in other areas, but not in rates. So to me, that says that rates haven't increased at all from budget, what we predicted. If you could clarify that for me.
Certainly, through the Mayor. Thank you. Yeah, those rates are all levied pretty as at 1st of July. So the only change we have to that is any remissions of rates or rebates that are granted, but that's a figure that was put through at the start of the year, and there's been no change to that since. We don't expect that to change in the March review either.
Thank you. With the cash assets, with cash and cash equivalents, we had the budget of 234,000. In September review, it still stayed at 234,000. Then it jumped to 2,331,000, which is an increase of 2,097,000. So what caused in a 3-month period for that amount of money to be increased under the cash and cash equivalents?
Through the Mayor, thank you. So that is the cash reserves that we hold, and we recognise that when we were doing the financial statements that we hadn't previously been picking those up as part of our budget process. So that's just a reclassification out of the equity section of the balance sheet or the financial position up into the cash.
So in a clarity sense, if you don't mind, all of a sudden, in simple terms, that means we found $2 million on the books.
It's just a reclassification out of the equity section down the bottom up to the top to recognise that they are physically our reserves that we hold with the LGFA.
Yep. Okay, with the liability section, I noticed that trade and other payables were down 200,000. Also, that when you look at the borrowings, we're down 5 million. So we went from 14,106,000 in the budget, what we looked at. In the first September review, we did still 14,106,000, but it dropped down to 9,103,000 in borrowings. So that's a $5 million and $3,000 decrease in borrowings. How did that come about in 3 months? Found a lot of money.
Through the Mayor, I'd have to take that one under advisement. I'm not 100% sure what the switch in that borrowings is. I do note that it is a payment of cash, but our borrowings are staying relatively consistent across the year, and the receipts from borrowings. I'll have to get back to you on that.
I guess when we look at these statements of financial position, it's giving an indication that the December review, 6 months into the financial year, there's going to be movements of money. We understand that, but sometimes there's some there which stands out a little bit. Wow, all of a sudden we pay down our debt by $5 million, which is a huge amount of money.
If I may, through the Mayor, it's my understanding we actually have our CADS loans. So when we receive rates in, we will draw upon those during the time that we haven't got rates. And when the quarterly rates instalments are due, we then get an influx of income. So those CADs, we don't need to draw upon them. So that does cause a fluctuation in our borrowings at various times throughout the year.
Thank you. And just a last question on the revaluations. How often do we do revaluations, yearly or bi-yearly? Because we had a large increase this.
Are you referring to revaluations of our assets?
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Sorry. So they are every 4 years we do a revaluations, and there's different classes of assets. So the revaluations we just had done was in road, footpaths, curbing. So we will have another revaluation of those for another 4 years.
And that contributed to our deficit.
Absolutely. We had our assets increased in value by about $61 million.
Are there any, Councillor Burns, sorry, you had some questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a, I suppose, question observation. Given the increase again in the operation deficit, I'm just wondering, is there any further opportunities to look at reducing operational costs further to try and minimise that? I understand administration have been doing a certain amount of work, but ideally to reduce that by another 600,000 or 700,000 would be excellent if that was possible.
Absolutely, and that is the remit that the chamber gives me on a regular basis, is to continuously look at savings. These are budgets; they're not the, obviously we need to wait till we get to the year end in our actuals. It is extremely unfortunate those revaluations have had a significant impact on our depreciation, which is, it's not an additional expense item, it's just the depreciation application that we need to apply in local government, but we will continue look to find savings throughout the rest of the year. And hopefully you'll see some of those in the next budget review.
So this potentially deficit should reduce from this figure.
Historically, that is normally what we've been able to do, but again, I haven't experienced a significant increase in the depreciation valuations. It's not an actual line item I can find in the budget, but I will continue to look at finding savings from what you originally budgeted for by way of a deficit.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions or any further commentary on that recommendation? In that case, then I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Hang on. Can we just do that again? Those in favour? And those against? That was carried unanimously. Thank you. Sorry. We now move to item 12, environment and infrastructure. And this is in relation to the proposed road closure of the unmade road reserve in Inman Valley Road, Inman Valley. I'm happy to do that recommendation on block. There are 3 recommendations there. If you're happy to have it moved on block, happy to move it on block, Councillor Henderson. Does somebody want to second that on block? Councillor Schiller? Do either of you want to speak to that?
Yes, I think this makes sense because this road is surplus to council requirements and it's separating 2 parcels of land owned by the same owners, and therefore it's just logical to move this motion forward and incorporate this unused road into that parcel of land.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Schiller, did you want to speak to it?
Just got the same sentiment. It's surplus to needs, and some of these roads that aren't being used should be closed and used appropriately.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Burns?
Thank you, Mayor. I only have 2 questions. One, whether the fire services use that road at all, and secondly, whether the other property owner at 70 Prowse Road has also given consent, because has part of the road abutting property.
Director Hayter, can you answer that one?
Thank you. Through the Mayor. So in relation to the fire services, no, they don't currently use that. And you'll note that the adjoining property to the south there, there is a road reserve there as well, which is owned by or under the care and control of the Minister. So that remains as road reserve if it does need to be. In terms of the adjoining or landowner consent or neighbouring property, that is part of the process that we will go through if council endorses.
Thank you.
Are there any further comments or discussion in relation to this item? I'll put it to the chamber then. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. (12.2) Request for council support, Friends of Granite Island, the Coastal Protection Board Community Grant. So the Friends of Granite Island are trying to secure a Coastal Protection Board Community Participation Grant and are requesting that council auspice that grant. But we need to make sure that we don't have any responsibility or liability for the project, that we need to make sure that they do all that they need to do. We're not responsible for any money. They're responsible for insurance and the like. But we would like to support them as much as we can in receiving the grant. So I'm happy to do, if you are those 3 recommendations on block, If someone would like to move that way, Councillor Kemp, you happy to do them en bloc? Yep. And a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Burns. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yes, I think this is a great initiative by the Friends of the Granite Island to actually go out and do the work they continue to do in getting this grant money and having council as auspices to sort of control the expenditure under the process, under the grant guidelines. I think it's a great success because they do some fantastic work over there, and if they continue to do what they're doing by restoring and serving native flora, fauna and various projects like that, I think it's a great idea and do support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burns?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I also agree it's very worthy, and the group reflect the community expectations for Granite Island. And it's just a shame the relevant state departments don't directly fund some of this support as well. But I think it's terrific, the work that they do.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion in relation to the recommendation 1, 2 and 3 en bloc? If not, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour and those against? That's carried unanimously. And I absolutely agree. The Friends of Granite Island do a fantastic job in looking after Granite Island and looking after the environment there. That the council are able to support them by auspicing their application for grants. And I think the more we can do that with community groups, the more we're actually able to spread what our volunteers are able to do, because our volunteers are the backbone of this community and do such an amazing job. And I'm sure we've got a number of them I recognise a number of them in our gallery tonight. So thank you for the work that you do. We now move to 13.1, which is minutes of the Audit Committee of the 6th of February. Would you like to move that way, Councillor Stewart? Councillor Burns. And seconding that, thank you, Councillor Kemp. Do either of you want to speak to those minutes? Does anybody want to speak to the minutes? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. 14.1, Victor Harbour Horse Tram Authority, their December budget review. And the recommendation is receiving and noting the budget review, including the uniform presentation of finances, detailing an unchanged contribution from council, which I think is great. Because often they're needing to have more money from council. So can I put that recommendation to the floor? All those, someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schofield, seconded Councillor Schiller. Getting ahead of myself. Would either of you like to speak to that? No, would anybody like to speak to that? Councillor Burns.
I think looking at some of the financial performance of the Horse Tram Authority in recent time, certainly in the merchandise area, has been outstanding. And I think that the VIP area will also be quite profitable. I was just wondering whether the capital items that they requested, which is a better, it's quite a substantial amount of money, if that was deferred for 12 months, whether that would negate or reduce the amount that council would have to contribute. It's not to say that it's not critical, but some of the things where they're upgrading every 3 years or 5 years, if that just got pushed back a year, that would not necessarily impact their operation, but I was just wondering whether that would reduce the requirement of what council contributes.
I might ask Director Rokoczynski to answer that one for you, Councillor Burns.
Thank you for your question through the Mayor. I think what you're asking probably more relates to the next agenda item. This one's just their December budget review. Nonetheless, I could always answer anyway. So the Horse Tram Authority have done a assessment of their asset life and have come up with that capital funding plan that you're referring to. They'll continue to reassess each year as to whether those items are needed, trying to find that optimal balance between having a high maintenance and hitting their operating budget maintenance costs versus replacement at the right optimum time. they think they've got it right, but of course they tweak it every year, and if there's no need to make that purchase, they wouldn't. But that's where they think it's the right mix at this point in time, having only just reviewed it for this coming budget.
Thank you. Can we keep our comments to the specific recommendation at hand, because we have got another item coming up, which I think will cover what you're talking about. Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I just wonder if we could make a recommendation to the authority, to the manager, about uniform presentation of finance statements, if we can have some consistency with what we see from our council as the parent body, where they only have 2 columns for their statements, which is 22-23 current budget, 22-23 proposed budget. We have 3 columns, which is 22-23 original budget, which shows what the original budget was. Then we have the September review, then we have the December review. That gives you a flow of how money is spent and how it's been tracked across the 6 months. I'm just wondering whether the Horse Tram Authority would actually have the same style of report to give us a bit more clarity and consistency around that.
We can take that on notice and have a talk to Meg about that. Can I leave that to you, Karen? Thank you. Are there any further comments or any further discussion in relation to the recommendation? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Now we have the Horse-Drawn Tram Authority draft business plan and budget, and the recommendation A, B and C I'm happy to do on block and can be discussed on block. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And seconded by Councillor Mann. Do you want to speak to this, Councillor Henderson? No. Councillor Mann? No. Does anybody have any further questions? Or Councillor Burns and then Councillor Karemba?
Again, looking at opportunities of reducing that, they've had a great increase in revenue by about 12%, and I'm just looking to see if there's an opportunity of reducing the contribution by council accordingly, and also to do with the capital budget, in that in this economic times, whilst I understand there's a need, I wouldn't have thought there would be a huge impact if it was deferred for 12 months, which again would just be further savings.
Karen?
Thank you for your questions. Through the Mayor, there's a couple of points there, but with the capital budget, the authority would be taking out their own borrowings. So separating the operating budget from the capital budget in this instance, the capital budget of the authority, they would be financing through the local government finance authority. So it wouldn't actually impact on council's contribution there. And as I mentioned before, they have already reshuffled their capital funding plan, which is ultimately, it's given that theirs is quite basic, it serves as their asset management planning as well. We could of course ask them to review it, but they have just reviewed it in order to bring it here for us to look at. And in terms of their operating budget and their contribution from council, so this is actually the first year since the authority was formed that they're asking for a lesser contribution. So they're actually asking for $50,000 less from council this year. So I know the board are extremely excited to be heading in the right direction with that. Things like the causeway being completed, and then being able to operate with fewer restrictions, and COVID not being quite the same impact that it has been, has given them much stronger income. And of course the merchandise area has made a massive difference as well. They didn't want to be too ambitious in their first year in terms of asking for too much lesser of contribution, but they're quietly confident that they may still return a surplus. So they didn't want to jump the gun, as we know that there's been other factors as well. Lots of people have been holidaying here in Victor Harbour versus other areas where there's been flooding, so they just were a little conservative with their income figures, but genuinely optimistic and a great result.
Councillor Corimba.
Thank you. I had a really in-depth conversation with Councillor Schofield, which sort of shed a fair bit of light on the horse tram cart, and I commend her on her work with the project. I just had a couple of questions. I think one of them's actually been clarified already, but my second question was the wages for the horse tram cart, are they under an EBA? Is it separate to council EBA?
They have their own EBA, they have their own employees.
Right, okay, no dramas. Thank you.
Are there any further discussions, further questions? Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. To Director Rokoczynski, could you just clarify the difference between a capital funding plan and a capital budget for the Horse Tram Authority, and does it make any sense to go that way or stick to the norm?
I can, through the chair. Same. It's just a slightly different terminology because you'll see theirs is one small column that fits on one page versus our capital budget and our asset management plans are a lot more complex when you look at the breadth of services and deliverables from the council versus the horse tram. So they've just kept it more simple, but for understanding, yes, it is the same thing.
Thank you. In the third recommendation, we talk about the surplus operating funds. Under the charter, they have to provide, any subsidiary has to provide a surplus back to council as part of their charter process. But in some cases, like the Fraua, they requested that surplus be returned to them for use. Now, the Horse Tram Authority is doing the same, but we don't know what they're predicting, around 10,000 for the first current budget coming up, that 10,000 surplus, so they want to keep that money. And we're asking them to revise that plan so they don't keep it, that we get the money, because we need the money. We need to pay down our debts.
Through the Mayor, I can answer that question. So you'll see in the budget review that they've obviously only done their December budget review and they've had an absolutely cracking January, I'm told. So things have improved significantly even from the time of doing the December budget review. I am not good at scrolling and talking at the same time, but I think it's around 45 off the top of my head that they're predicting at the December budget review, although I happen to know that's looking a lot better than that. So what they're asking for at this point, what they had proposed in the memo that came to council was that they utilised the operating surplus to fund some of the items that they were unsuccessful in getting funding for as part of the horse tram stables build. We're still yet to understand exactly what those items are, so we're actually going to prepare a separate report to the March council meeting, so council can actually make an informed decision in that regard rather than us lumping it in with this particular item, which is more about endorsing the 23-24 budget. So their capital funding plan, as they had proposed to retain that surplus and use it to fund their capital budget in lieu of them taking out borrowings through the local government finance authority. We're making a recommendation that is different to that the board has recommended via the CEO. We're suggesting that they should return any surplus at the end of the year because it certainly would help to reduce our end of year deficit, and then they would be able to utilise borrowings, which is permitted in accordance with their charter, so that they're actually not, or they're sharing the load of that full asset life rather than spending the money and using it in the 1 year. So, intergenerational equity is the term that I know Kelly refers to that, me not being the finance person myself. So the proposal has, we're recommending slight difference, but there will be an opportunity at that March council meeting for council to be provided with more information about what they'd like to utilise some of that surplus operating budget for in terms of the stables, but we're not there yet. That's not what this decision here is about tonight.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure if you asked the question of the authority that if we've got to reduce our contribution, which is operating by 50,000, and let them keep their operating surplus, which is about 50,000, Is that an oxymoron process? Because it just seems weird that we take from Peter to pay Paul in the sense of that process. But I can understand if they make 120,000 surplus, certainly they want to keep it for their purposes. But that doesn't involve, that's just operating only. It's not about capital, where we fund the capital for some of those things. And that's some of their problems, that they didn't get the grant funding for some capital works, which is our responsibility as a council for the capital projects. Is that correct?
Answer that. There was many statements there. I'll do my best to address them all, Councillor Kemp. So firstly, there is a little muddle there between the operating and the capital. So their operating surplus of, I think I said 45,000 is what they've predicted, but it will probably be more, just looking at figures from January. So that will that is separate from their capital budget, and it's different from cash flow. So they can return that to council, which the charter, if council requests it, they can return it. They were proposing to use it to fund their capital budget instead of borrowings. So but we're suggesting that in the way we do things is usually take out borrowings for capital. So there is intergenerational equity. The 50,000 or the 45 and 50,000 are completely separate matters. They've done a completely different budget, utilising their expected income now that they know a bit more about how the merchandise will sell. They know a bit more about the way that the causeway has impacted their increased income, and the way their ticket prices and all of those changes that they've made have tracked. So next year's budget is very different, and it is indeed just a coincidence, those two amounts.
Thank you. And my final point on the next draft budget, it talks about the capital process of when they want another, it's over a long-term period. But the two issues that concerns me is that they've got two vehicles. One's a work vehicle, one's a work ute. One's replaced 3 years, one's replaced 5 years. So I'm just wondering why are they replacing one sooner? It's not like I would consider they do a lot of mileage in 3 years, but why couldn't they just replace all their vehicles at 5 years? And why do they need a second float if they're only floating 2 horses on a given day, or go back? Or I know there's second float they can use for second horses if they need to have 3 trams running or something like that. But yeah, just a clarification around that capital budget.
Through the Mayor, I'm only basing this on some conversations with Meg, not knowing what was going to be asked in the chamber, of course. I know that the second float was around operational efficiency and being able to get the horses to and from the causeway area in good time, and that it was thought to be a false economy to have the back and forward and the extra staffing, because that ended up becoming a more costly way of doing things. They've done a whole lot of assessing of how to do things most efficiently for their operations. What was the second part of that? Sorry. Oh yes, thank you. The 3 and the 5 years. Thanks, Kathy. So I couldn't tell you why one's 3 years and one's 5 years. It could be that one was purchased earlier. It could be to do with the use of functionality of the vehicles. But I could take that on notice and find out for you from the General Manager.
I'd be appreciative, because we fund that capital project, the council. So I'm just looking at trying to maintain consistency through purchase and rotation of plant and equipment. So it's sort of utilised. And sometimes with the economic climate, we may have to extend those out by another year or something, just to give a bit of relief in the area of what we give out to all our subsidiaries. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or any further discussion on that recommendation? Councillor Henderson, did you want to close the debate? I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Item 16, questions on notice. Victor Harbour Watercourse floodplain mapping study from Councillor Kemp. You've got your questions answered there, Councillor Kemp. and we don't need anything from the floor in relation to those. So we now move to 18.1.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Sorry. Yes, Councillor.
I'm just wondering, you skipped over any urgency matters.
There are no urgency matters.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Are there any questions without notice? Councillor Quimbera, Councillor Kemp, and then Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. My first question is, last council meeting dated the 23rd of January, it was reported that police were in attendance. There's been a lot of community interest as to why 4 police cars were here. Councillors have been provided with information about this matter by email. However, many City of Victor Harbor ratepayers are understandably concerned by the presence of police at a meeting and are seeking account on public record. My questions are, did any employee or elected member of this council contact the police about the meeting before the meeting? Did any employee or elected member of this council express concerns for their personal safety or the safety of others ahead of the meeting or the meeting would necessitate contacting police? Would the CEO please confirm the council is continuing to liaise with the police about contingency plans to evacuate the chamber during council meetings at which ratepayers are present? Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I think Victoria, CEO, and I have replied to that to all members. You would have got an email. I've also sent a similar email to I think 3 or 4 ratepayers that have asked exactly the same questions in exactly the same words. The police, a policeman came prior to the council meeting. Nobody asked them to come. Nobody rang them to have a look and to let us know that there were concerns of the councils because of the group of protesters that were at the Onkaparinga Council meeting. And we said we had no concerns. There's nothing on the agenda. We didn't expect any protesters. During that conversation, they said, well, you know, if you did have protesters or if there was an emergency in the chamber, if there was a fire in the chamber or a fire somewhere, how would you get out of the chamber? And so we looked at different ways that may need to facilitate if we need to get out of the chamber quickly so that we can go in an area that's not open to the public and get out. That is, I understand, being looked at and will be coming back to the chamber next month. Is that right, Victoria? The evacuation procedures and what might need to happen is coming next month because it needs a budget.
No, it doesn't need a budget, but I will be coming back to the chamber. But it's not something I do in consultation with SA Police. It's something I would do in consultation with the members. It's an internal program.
Because at that time, Councillor Crember there was a number of people in the gallery, and we'd said to the police that normally we don't have that many in the gallery. There's nothing really happening that's going to warrant lots of people in the gallery. They saw lots of people coming. In fact, our gallery was full, and we had to put the television out in the foyer so that people could listen to the live streaming. So the police hung around. I think at one stage they came in and said, you know, is there any issue? Staff said to them, there's no issue at all, and they left. So there's nothing out of the ordinary. There's nothing concerning. I don't expect to see them again. Anything else you'd like to add, CEO?
No, I just clarified because you did ask specifically me the question as to whether I was still liaising with SAPOL around an evacuation plan. So no, that is something that this council would undertake itself. We did receive notification from the Local Government Association because there have been 3 councils that have been attended by the Sovereign Citizens protest group, which are, to my knowledge, protesting some of the smart city initiatives. And so the Local Government Association has advised all councils in regards to they need to give consideration to how we operate. As the level of government closest to the people, we are very open to the community. Community can sit within our meetings and in our gallery and can have free access in and out of the building. And we, unfortunately, need to give consideration if there was any disturbances.
I noticed you said that usually we don't have a lot of people turn up to the chamber. I think times are changing. I think we should encourage the community to get involved more and see how this works. democracy, I think, is very important. So for that matter, I encourage people to come down to council meetings and to actually engage with elected members as much as possible. There's no point in waiting till you get your rate notice to be upset. You know, make yourself noted early.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more, Councillor Coremba. And we do encourage people to come to the meeting, and if they can't come, then we have our live streaming so they can watch the meetings at home, and I'm sure we have a number of people watching the meetings. Whenever I'm on the radio, I encourage people to give me a ring or to give any of the elected members a ring. One of the things that I think is really important is great communication between elected members and the community, and between council and the community. We've done more community consultations in the last 4 or 5 years than we've ever done before. We really want to hear from our community, and before the rates come out, as you mentioned rates, we will be having a number of community consultations in relation to the draft rates and business plans. So we encourage all of the community to be involved in that. So thank you very much for that. Councillor Kemp. Sorry, these are just questions. This isn't a debate. Councillor Kemp, you've got a question?
Thank you, yes. City of Victor Harbor has identifiable hazards, whether man-made or natural. I'm just wondering my questions, and through the Southfront report, which raises a few issues there, and which was part of my questions on notice was about. The two questions I have: do the City of Victor Harbor have a hazard register, and is it available to elected members? And secondly, if we've got identified hazards, have we done any risk assessments and to identify what levels of risk those hazards are and what they imposed on the community or council's budgets?
Council has done emergency management planning, if that's what you're referring to, in terms of different possibilities of emergencies. In terms of it, we don't have a hazard register more broadly for our whole community. Obviously, we have different registers internally as an organisation, and say have emergency management plans in terms of our response for floods or fire or support to those emergency services organisations. So I'm not sure in terms of what you mean by a hazard register more broadly.
Okay, I'll clarify that if I may. The hazard register is really a list of hazards identified. The Southfront report identifies a number of hazards throughout the community around the two rivers. So to me, I would have thought those hazards would have been listed as a priority to do risk assessment, so we can look at either allocating budget to actually mitigate those risks, or certainly have them planned into our emergency management plan, etc., things like that. But first we have to identify the hazards.
Can I just clarify, the Southfront report was to identify flood mapping throughout our area, and it was part of a more broader report. So we're still doing urban stormwater management studies, and also the state government's currently doing overlays in regards to the planning system of flooding that is just being released for consultation as we speak. So the Southfront report was undertaken to identify, yes, hazards by way in which we could actually improve our infrastructure longer term to reduce those hazards. And that may be where we need to put in more infrastructure by way of stormwater or culverts, or increase the capacity or size of those areas of infrastructure. So we include that information in our asset management plans and work through it as a council in implementing those improvements on an ongoing basis. It's not a one size fits all. It's about ways in which the council can look at reducing those hazards by way of the implementation of infrastructure.
Thank you. And just to clarify, in a way, I suppose you're doing it by default through that process, that you're identifying that there are some hazards and there are mitigation processes, and there's a certain link to other documents and processes as well. But I was just wondering, is it worthwhile as a City of Victor Harbor to actually try and identify what hazards we do have in our community and what risks they are, because if we can try and look at some ways of mitigating them in the future. It's a long-term process. But it's just
it is, and I'm very happy to take it on board and on notice. We do that. Obviously, we have a number of hazards, and we have operations teams that put provisions in place if and when we need to in various different events, whether they be storm, flood, fire. And that's why we have a response team. But I'm very happy to take it on notice and discuss it with you further.
Councillor Burns, you had a question.
I did, thank you, Mayor. In regard to the question gallery from Peter Charles, coincidentally, I had been requested by a number and council administration have been addressing the reserves and other gardening issues down there. But I did notice whilst I was down there with residents that that exit property owned by the council is actually fenced off. And I was just wondering if that was a council fence or someone else property has fenced it. Because if an emergency occurs, how do people get through?
It's not an emergency exit. It's not seen as an emergency exit, and it had a fence in it when we bought it.
Okay.
It was fenced by the developer.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. No more questions without notice. We now move to a motion on notice, paid car parking rollout limits. Councillor Burns, this is your motion on notice, if you would like to propose your motion. Page 137.
I had been requested by a number of members of the community and businesses in the area to pose this motion that the City of Victor Harbor traffic movement and car parking strategy document be amended to exclude any further expansion of paid on-road or off-road parking fees and charges outside of that already existing within the current Esplanade car park and within the future McKinley Street multi-deck car park, should that project be approved by elected members and construction completed. The concern was that along the foreshores and within the business areas, residents felt that they would be unduly impacted if there was metered parking put in, and requested that this motion be put up to exclude paid parking in the future. And if it is unsuccessful, I'd like to propose an alternate motion, but I'd first put it up to the vote. Members.
Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Corimbo. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Corimbo? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Schiller, Councillor Henderson, and did you have your hand up too, Councillor Kemp? Angela?
I would assume that if any paid parking in the future was to be contemplated, that it would come back to the chamber anyway. So by locking ourselves into a specific non-fee paying area, being the car park at the front of the causeway there and the proposed car park, which isn't built yet, I think we just need to leave it that long as the decision about paid parking is addressed by the chamber in the future, that it's not currently relevant.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. One of the major roles of elected members in this chamber is strategic planning. And one question we need to be asking ourselves every time a motion comes to the table is, does this fit our strategic plan? Well, I think this motion is actually interfering with the current strategic plan. The current strategic plan includes the Victor Harbor Town Centre traffic management and car parking strategy. For future strategic planning, we need flexibility in our options in order to put in place the best possible parking solutions for our local residents, our local businesses, and our tourists into the future. This motion, I believe, will hinder that. This and future councils need the ability to offer a range of parking options, including time parking, free parking and paid parking, to deal with the evolving and changing situations into the future. This is part of a much broader traffic management strategy, and we shouldn't be nitpicking parts of it without being aware of the consequences on the overall strategy. The time to make changes to a strategy is when that strategy is reviewed, and we do regularly review our strategies. So I will not be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Look, it's one of those key issues that is this motion, as I see it, only looks at two key areas. Is the current car park that we have paid parking in, and a future car park, which is a multi-deck car park, which will have paid parking in it anyway. Part of our role as elected members, and I understand Councillor Henderson, which is coming strategic, but also we must listen to our community. A lot of our community doesn't want paid parking down the streets, the parking meters or whatever it is that we would go down that way. I think we need to review this strategy because it's 2016 or 17 when it was implemented. The fact's also that, you know, we have so many different time zones in parking all through the city. It's not consistent. And I think that if we want to be a tourist town to attract people to come here, and to give an example, a lady I spoke to a couple of years ago about who came from Caloundra, she said, don't you want people to come here? I said, why do you ask that? She said, we've got paid parking. At Caloundra, we have no paid parking. We want people to come to our town. So as a small town, I just think that I support this motion because there's only two key areas, and we need to review that strategy to reflect.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. I've got a couple of questions which perhaps I'll ask the CEO about this. Would a change like this require public consultation?
I would suggest yes, given that the current strategic plan was consulted on with the community, and it's a significant change. Council is trying to engage with its community, ensure that its strategic plans are reflective of what its community's needs and interests are. So if it's significantly changed, yes. Doesn't need to, but I would suggest council may be criticised for not consulting its community if it was to amend it.
And the other question I had was, what is the impact of this? What would the impact of this be on our current strategy? Because we have got a car parking strategy. If we were to change that aspect, does that change the whole strategy, or can we change part of the strategy?
No, the council can change part of its strategy. It obviously just goes against the principles of what was in the original strategy. So council is within its remit. If it wishes to amend or change, it can, but it needs to look on the principles and why it does it and how it does it, and if it's in consultation with its community.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or any feedback? Councillor Kemp, you've got a question?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. On the strategy, which was developed through 2016-17, when's it up for review?
There's no set date for its review. It's something obviously once it had got to its end of life, if it was no longer relevant, I would suggest there's still a lot of information within that. It is still relevant because it was a longer term strategy document. It's not a compulsory requirement, like it's not legislated that you must have one. So if this chamber chooses to review it, then that is what we will do.
Councillor Mann.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, I guess just firstly to Councillor Burns, I very much appreciate you bringing the concerns of residents you've spoken to the chamber for the discussion. I think that's part of our job, and I appreciate you doing that. I just think, and it may still be part of the learning curve that is council, but I think the way in which you're going about this might not be the best way, being in the community's interest, but also in trying to achieve what I believe you're trying to achieve as well. And I guess partly for my rationale around that is I don't think that sort of scrubbing out certain words and sentences from a 2016, 2017 high level policy will achieve what you're trying to do. And I think that's partly because these policies aren't made overnight. Just looking back at the background of this one, which was pre my time, the development of it was there was consideration of at least 5 existing plans and policies workshops and consultation with Business Victor Harbour, elected members, community members, detailed investigations, multiple on-street parking surveys, road network audits, and a review of multiple of the intersections. And I guess what's come out at the council at that time, I wasn't on that council, you and on that council, was that at that time that's the policy that they supported in light of all the community consultation. And I think we have to, I think, try and remember that. And as you work on your own policies over the next 4 years, you'll see the work that goes into the development of them, and see how sort of small changes like this aren't necessarily the best way. Again, this is a broad strategy. It states in the report as well that the next best step in progressing this would be that implementation plan. And it says here, part of that implementation plan would look at where paid parking is, when it's rolled out, how that should occur, and more importantly, who pays for it. Because as you'd be already aware, already 3 months in, there's not many ways for council to bring in revenue. And I think I remember pre-COVID, the City of Adelaide, one of their significant revenue income generators was their paid parking. And I think there is opportunity for the City of Victor Harbour to tap into some of that revenue and to alleviate some of the extra burden off our rates as well. We are South Australia's best tourist location, as judged by myself, and I know I'm biased, but we receive a significant amount of tourists every year. So I think it's only fair if we're receiving that many tourists, they're coming and using all of the facilities and the infrastructure that our community pays for, that they should contribute in that way. And I get whilst your motion's sort of relating to a few car parks and generally all this, I think it's too broad a wash to apply to this policy. So I guess my perspective would be a review wouldn't be the next best step either. Potentially it would be that implementation plan if that's what you're wanting to look at and have those discussions around. But then again, my next question would be whether that implementation plan should happen now or a little bit later once we know what the multi-deck car park looks like, and how that fits within the equation of things. But again, I definitely appreciate what you've done in bringing this up for the consideration, but unfortunately I won't be able to support that one tonight for those reasons. But thanks.
You'll be closing the debate if you respond, Councillor Burns. Does anybody else have any questions? Councillor Karemba, you seconded the motion and you chose not to speak. Because this is still a learning curve for you as a new councillor, with the leave of the meeting, I will let you speak now, if that's all right with the other members. Yep. Councillor Burns, Councillor Karemba, if you'd like to speak, but just remember, if you second the motion, you need to speak when you second it.
I understand where Councillor, sorry, just going to be blank there. Where Councillor Mann is coming from. But we do have to acknowledge that, yes, we do have a lot of tourists come in and use our facilities, but they also leave a lot of money in town, which a lot of businesses rely on. And I think if we do something that's as simple as it may seem, introduce paid parking everywhere or whatever our strategy is, that could be to the detriment of some of these businesses. So I think that's something that needs to be considered. And I do understand that you said that council generally only gets its revenue from rates, and we've got to look at other avenues. And I agree with what you're saying. I just don't agree with paid parking as one of those revenue streams. Thank you.
Councillor Burns, would you like to close the debate?
I would, thank you. And I just wanted to say I appreciate everyone's opinions, and I understand where you're coming from. What was conveyed to me, normally I would have brought it up as a review of the policy. What was brought up by businesses especially was it's been 5 years since the strategy. They've had COVID, they've had an economic downturn. They're really looking at ways of maximising their customers, and they see paid parking as being inhibiting of that. And the same with the people who go down to the markets on the foreshore. They see parking as impacting that as well. So that's why I brought up about not having paid parking. And as I mentioned, if this is unsuccessful, I do have an alternate motion, which is to review the policy.
Thank you, Councillor Burns. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour? And those against? That recommendation is lost.
Call a division, please.
Certainly. All those in favour?
A point of order, Your Worship. Every time there's a motion put forward, there are comments from the gallery.
Okay, thank you. Can I just remind the gallery to, it is quite distracting from us when people are talking. So if you can just keep it down. Those in favour, Councillor Burns, Councillor Karimba, and Councillor Kemp. And those against, Councillor Mann, Councillor Schiller, Councillor Schofield and Councillor Henderson. That motion is lost. And you have another. Just have to, because this is a motion on notice, just depending on what it is, I'll either take it on notice for next time. Otherwise, it has to be dealt with as a motion without notice.
And a motion on notice for next time is fine.
Yep, you happy to do that?
Sure.
All right,
Yep.
Lovely, thank you very much. I mean, there's lots of different things that we can do, and if we do build the McKinley Street car park, there may be things like number plate recognition that we can use so that ratepayers have their number plate recognised and can go in and have free parking, and people who are, tourists come in and have to pay, even though they're paying now. In the summertime, it's very hard to get a park, and the parks always fall down the end. But I think that a review of the plan would be a good idea. We now move to 18.2, which is another motion on notice. The Undercroft Disability Car Parking. Oh, yep. And Councillor Schiller. Councillor Schiller can propose her motion, and she's asked if the CEO will read it out for her. Thanks.
So for Councillor Schiller is that Council administration investigate and seek legal advice as to whether Victor Central Shopping Centre and or Big W are required to lodge a development application for the removal of disability parking and police emergency services parking in the Undercroft car park, which appear to have been converted to Big W parcel pick up and collect direct to boot. Number 2, whether this triggers the Victor Harbour Central Shopping Centre to provide an alternate compliance system access from the shopping centre ground floor to the Undercroft car park for members of the community who no longer able to use the travelator. Number 3, Council investigate if the signage placed at the entrance of the car park stating that there is no disability access to the Undercroft level is appropriate and meets relevant building code legislation and DDA standards. And 4, Council administration provide a report of their findings back to the next council meeting.
Thank you. Angela, would you like to speak to your motion?
Sorry, Mayor Jenkins, just first, I'd just like to disclose potentially a general conflict of interest, just because my parents have a lease premises within Victor Central, and I'll deal with that by leaving the chamber. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Schiller, would you like to speak to your motion?
Okay. Originally I brought a motion to council concerned about the removal of 4 to 5 approximate disability car parks that I discovered on December the 27th. And I appreciate the commentary that administration have given me about trying to work with Victor Central and to make sure that in a legal context that not to divulge too much information which could prejudice the potential outcomes. So without actually commenting on the conversations that I've had, both with Victor Central and administration, the reason I've put this up now is that I did put that initial motion up on January the 3rd. It's now February the 27th, and therefore I'm just trying to get this locked down to a time frame, and so we have an additional month in place for this to occur. My comment is that no matter what has gone on here, it's not a good look. Basically, 4 to 5 disability parks and a police emergency park have been completely removed from the Undercroft car park. That is quarter of the car parking space of the centre, and that is the only covered car parking spaces for things like wind, rain and heat. People with disabilities have the right to be in any part of a building, and particularly people with disabilities should have the right to be parking in a space which is protected from the weather, just the same as everybody else. So the reason I've put that there is that I'm locking those particular things in, is to find out whether they should have applied for development approval to remove them, because in its existing application many years ago, that would have gone through council. It's not a planning SSA issue, because council would have the application from that initial application many years ago. As far as the signage goes, I really do not like that signage as a person with a disability, and think it's quite offensive. It's basically saying, don't come into this part of your building. So the legalities of whether that signage is appropriate needs to be sought out. And then what was the other component I had was that unfortunately there are questions whether the disability parks were removed because of the fact that the click and collect was going to go in, or whether it's attributed to questions surrounding the travelator. The travelator is something that when it was put into the Victor Central Shopping Centre would have been compliant to access requirements, and that's why the 5 car parks would have been put in the development application to accommodate people with disabilities and give them the equal right to use the covered car park space. So the question needs to be asked, what is the problem? Is it the travelator? If it is the travelator, that has to be addressed in a different way, and an alternate form of transport to the Undercroft car park needs to be sought in a prescribed time frame, because if this is just left sitting there, Victor Central naturally could just wipe their hands of it by taking out their disability parks. They've covered themselves by taking those parks out, but not addressing the issue, which the real issue is that we now, as people with disability, are not allowed to be from their signage. I shouldn't be in there. So
got 1 minute, Councillor Schiller.
So I just ask that we get this investigation done in a timely manner, and come back to the chamber with some definite answers.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Please, can I remind the gallery that you're a gallery, you're not an audience. Please. I beg your pardon, Mr. Charles. This is not a debate. I'm asking the gallery to be quiet. I respectfully asked that before. Can you please be quiet? Do I have a seconder for your motion, Councillor Schiller? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Do you want to speak to that?
I think Councillor Schiller has said it all.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to make any comment?
I just noticed that in the first part of the recommendation, the council administration investigate and seek legal advice. But then in the budget implications, there is no budget implication. If we seek legal advice, is this free legal advice or are we paying for this advice?
We have got some LGA lawyers that we can ask advice from. If we need any more complex or, complex advice, then we may need to pay for it.
Okay.
If I can just add to that, it's not free legal advice. We do have a budget line for legal advice. It'd be within existing budget lines, and we'll identify what that is when we bring the report back.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. Just 2 points. One, does the removal of these underground disability car parks mean that overall that they're no longer compliant with the number of disability car parks they need to provide?
I think this is one of the investigations that will be carried out.
And the other was, I'd be interested in administration's feedback on what they've been able to find.
Well, again, we'll provide the report back to council once we've been able to articulate all that information rather than being speculative at the minute.
Are there any further comments? Put this to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried unanimously. And thank you very much for putting up this recommendation, Councillor Schiller. I think that that disability access and inclusion is really, really important for our community. And I think you finding firsthand at what some of the barriers are is an asset to this council. So thank you very much. Do we have any motions without notice? There are no motions without notice. We now move to item 20.1, which is confidential. And it's a confidential development application referral to the Minister. And it refers to legal advice, which is privileged legal advice, in it that we've been provided by Wallman's lawyers on instructions from the Council via the Local Government Mutual Liability Scheme, and the Chief Executive Officer will be explaining the advice to Council members about the intent. So I move to go into confidence. Can someone move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Seconded, Councillor Schofield. Either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's unanimously passed. Thank you very much, gallery, and thank you for those listening online. I'd ask you to vacate the chambers. Thank you.